Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live stream. I hope everybody's doing great today. So we're going to turn up the Pinecone pens, or one of them anyway, one of the Pinecone blanks. So last week we did Pinecone casting, but I was going for red, white, and blue, kind of a 4th of July theme, and kind of played with a different way of doing these. I've done quite a few different like kind of red, white, and blue things. I've done quite a few, red, white, and blue or patriotic pine cones. I actually used to sell those. This time I wanted to try like kind of a half and half kind of thing. It's obviously 3 colors, but half and half with red and blue, and then white. Do something else with the white, and try to get something kind of interesting looking. So it's an interesting thing when you're pouring pinecone blanks because it's going to kind of filter through, and the reason that I wanted to kind of really separate it was to get that kind of contrast. Sometimes when you pour colors on pine cones, the nice thing is if you're going for a good color mix, it will do that because it's kind of filtering through all the little pine cone things. But if you're kind of going for like, red, white, and blue, sometimes it gets a little bit lost. The colors get kind of really thin and you don't get those kind of bold contrasts. So we'll see how this goes. And then we tried a split cup. And I didn't really, so one thing that while I was pouring it, I didn't really think about it until I actually popped the blanks out. The problem with that is I think we did white in the middle. It doesn't really matter where it goes, but it's all pouring at once. And I kind of just poured it in one spot and it all filtered out, and we were looking at it and you saw like kind of the red and the blue, and the white kind of went away. It was kind of weird. It didn't give you like, if you're pouring in a square, like a rectangle in this case, it's not going to work the way that we were thinking. I don't know why I didn't think about this. 2 problems. It's just going to kind of, go in a different direction. You're not going to get like red, white, and blue. You're going to get something a little bit different. And the other issue is the white is a lot heavier, so it tends to want to just go to the bottom. So it's kind of an interest. I don't know. We did one batch of those. I didn't pour any more like that. For the pen blank club. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. They're not exactly what I wanted. That's the only thing. But I think what you're gonna get is there's gonna be probably more white on one side of the blank, and it's gonna be a little bit maybe more in the middle, and then you'll have kind of red and white. So you're still gonna get, I think, in the pens. We're not gonna turn one of those. I wanted to turn one of the ones that I was like shooting for in my brain. But I think you're gonna get something, you're still going to get a red, white, and blue. It's still doing what I wanted, but it's putting things in a different spot than I thought of. So anyway, let's look at these blanks. What am I doing here? Here we go. So here's a stack of these blanks. Now I didn't cut most of them on the sides. It just saves a step. I cut the tops. But you can see, like I was saying, the pine cones, when you cut into them, and once we turn down the blanks, it's gonna, you're gonna get much further into the material. It looks like little fireworks to me. I really like the way these little, and I don't even know if I'd really actually call these mini pine cones. And part of the reason why I'm making that distinction is if you're buying pen blanks, I'm gonna say, if you find somebody selling mini pine cones, it's probably not going to be like these as much. Mine are. I don't know if I call them that. I just call them pine cone blanks. I think usually I don't have them in stock or anything, but I think you're probably, if you buy mini pine cones, you're going to get the little alder cones, and they are mini. They're a little bit different. They're still cool. There's nothing wrong with them. I just want to make sure that everybody kind of understands this may be better explained, or a better distinction, I guess, or whatever. Mini pine cones, typically I think people are talking about these as like little alder cones. So I'll show you what alder cones look like and the difference. These are pretty mini. So these little guys are alder cones, and they're different. They're just not exactly the same. There's really not a whole lot on the in like the middle of them. Whereas like these, I don't know what these are. These are like hemlock cones or something like that. They're a little bit more substantial. So maybe more like small pine cones is a better terminology for what we're doing today. I don't know. And that's not 100%. It depends on what people want to call things, but excuse me. Just wanted to let you guys know there is a little bit of a difference. So here's one of the split cup pours, and you can see the white, really, you get a bigger amount of it on the bottom. It kind of tends to want to stay on the bottom there. And but I still think it's going to look cool when you turn it. You're going to get bands of white, it's the same idea, but just different places. For these guys, you get a little bit more white all over the place, the way that I poured it, where, we had 2 cups, poured red and white in a little ways, probably about halfway up, and then I kind of just put some white on top and layered it, and then poured more red and blue. And when you do 2 colors in a square, they're going to meet, and then you're going to get that 50-50 like we've got here. So it's going to be cool. Like I said, and I'm not like tossing out the other ones that I made. There's only 1 batch of those, and some of those will go into the Pen Blank Club boxes, and I don't think they're going to be bad or anything. They're not. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just, like I said, I was going for something a little bit different. So we'll see how things go. Now, one thing I do want to mention with Pinecone blanks, I would recommend that you use a brad point bit when you're drilling these things. And this kind of goes for anything where there's a lot of things that you've got stuff stuck in resin. Wood, if you're doing stabilized woods, hybrid blanks. You may even do this even for like 3D prints in some cases. The thing is, you've got different like densities, hardnesses of materials, and if the drill bit's going in, even if you get everything all perfect, you've center drilled and everything's starting good, if the drill bit hits an area where there's like half softer and half harder material, it's going to want to go around the harder material, and you're going to deflect your drill bit. If you've got that brad point, it's going to help keep things. It's not going to be 100% perfect in every case, but compared to just a normal tipped bit, that brad point is going to keep your drill more centered throughout. You're still, depending on the hardnesses, differences of things in materials, and even with these, I had a little bit of deflection even though I was using a brad point bit on one of the sides. But it's still way, way better than if you're just using a normal twist bit. So definitely, if you don't have brad point bits, get some for pen blanks that you want to drill out that have different densities of material in there. And it'll help things out. In most cases, especially like just normal, well, if you're doing wood pen blanks, you definitely want a brad point also, because you've got the wood grain, and those normal twist bits, they'll just go all over. They'll follow the grain pattern, and again, it's another one of those, there's different hardnesses in wood grain. So, you want to use a brad point bit on wood pen blanks all the time also. But for your standard resin blanks, if it's just 100% resin, you don't have to worry. You can just use a regular twist bit. Hopefully there's video and sound. Okay, good. Yeah, it looks like my mic's working on my side. I think everything's good here. So just a couple little tips on getting these things ready, and be a little careful when you're drilling and even when you're turning. Even if you stabilize pine cones, they're still kind of chippy. That's why, we kind of discussed the stabilizing pine cones thing, and the bigger ones, there's a little bit of advantage, but it's not going to solve the problems. It's not going to create like this really hard thing that does not, have any chippiness to it. It's a little better, basically, and I don't know that it's really worth the trouble for like a one-off batch of blanks. I wouldn't stabilize even a larger pine cone probably. I would rather just treat it while I'm turning. So you'd have to be a little bit more careful during the drilling and all these things, a little bit. But you can just employ your CA glue and different things to make sure that everything kind of stays together and the turning doesn't go bad. Now again, these aren't stabilized. They're usually not particularly fussy, the smaller pine cones like this, and the mini pine cones are fine. They don't do anything. They're not even really chippy. But there are a couple areas that may be a little, kind of chippy. The bigger centers can have like holes in them, and this is another issue with the stabilizing, is sometimes the stabilizing, there may be like kind of some, like a bigger void, and stabilizing resin isn't meant to like fill voids and things. It's meant to replace air. So think about how small air molecules are. Air in cells, right? So it's meant to harden very tiny, like molecule size, areas within material, not voids. So you're still going to have some issues even if you stabilize, if there's like a big void in whatever material you're dealing with. So no matter what, stabilize, not mini, larger, it doesn't really matter which pine cones and stuff, you still may need to just kind of fill a thing here and there. But these little small pine cones usually don't cause too much problem. So with all that said, let's head over to the lathe and let's get started. One other thing, actually I got the right camera. What I'm going to turn, let's talk about that. So, and I had another weird issue. I think the tube was kind of bent, I don't know, like oval shaped, like it wasn't perfectly round, or something weird happened when I glued it in. I could not get my TBC bushings in this one. So I think there's something weird with this tube. It was almost like it was like not perfectly round. So if that happens, if you've got a set of, like, if you're using the TBC bushings, they're meant to fit very tight. There's not much slop in TBC bushings, and they're meant to be like that. Your regular bushings, those typically are not particularly great. That's another reason why I don't really like using the standard bushings. But if you got something where you can't get the TBC bushing in, a lot of times the standard ones will go in. They're usually like the shorter. So let me pull this out. Compared to, let me go grab a TBC for the same size, and I'll just kind of show you the difference. So I got to get a lot more stuff in with the TBC bushing than these standard ones. They're shorter. They're usually not particularly good tolerances. So this fits fine in here, but I can't get this TBC bushing in. It's just like even if I did get it in, I wouldn't be able to get it out. So just drop these guys in, and I got my adapters from tbcbushings.com. So we're good to go on that. I got the other tube was fine though, so I got my TBC bushings in there. So just wanted to mention that. And the other thing is I marked my blank somewhere. Right here. I put a mark across the two blanks. And because I'm going to turn that mark away on the outside, I've got the insides marked on these guys so that I can align it. It'll probably be pretty obvious, but it's a good thing to just put a little mark on there on the inside of the tube so that you've got a reference when it's time to put it together. All right, so let's get to turning, guys. What do you guys think? I'm excited. I want to see how these goes. Now, one other thing again, I'm going to turn this one with the adapters first. I'll just get that one out of the way. Let's see here. It doesn't really matter which direction. I'll just turn it like it's like the pen's going to keep going this way. So we'll get that set up. Let me get the YouTube open. There we go. So I can see the comments. Oh, we got Mr. Jim's in the house now. Nice. Welcome, welcome. I'm doing good, Jim. Doing pretty good. In other news, temps are going up in the shop, and you know how much I love that. But I have successfully, I think, we'll have to see when it gets to like 85, when like in the middle of the dog days of summer. I think I've got a solution. I've got a little air-conditioned room now. So my dad had this little room in his part of the shop where it was like his sanding room. It would kind of contain the sanding dust stuff from stuff that he does. And he doesn't really use it that much, and there's a good amount of room. It's really it turned into a storage room, but then he took a giant machine out, and we got even more room. So I was like, well, that's enclosed. I don't have to spend a bunch of money on framing and doing all this junk to try and get my casting area fixed. And so I kind of sealed the joints. It's kind of a weird thing. It's really kind of thrown together, and it's not even like really drywall. But I put a little portable air conditioner in there, and I think it's going to work. So like I said, the only thing that I don't know right now, because it's not 85 degrees in there, but I do think that little air conditioner will get the temperatures to a reasonable point, so I don't have as much issues. And what ends up happening is it just thins the resin out, and I get more kind of color bleed, especially with the team color blanks, all that stuff. So I'm excited. We'll see how it goes. All right, now one thing also, before I start, that I'm going to mention, again, when you're using mixed materials like this, you've got different densities, hardnesses in some cases, and it depends on what's going on, but this is another case where sometimes it might help. You might get a better cut with the standard cutter. I'm going to try that first and see how it goes. Sometimes it may want to tear stuff out more, so you know, you got to kind of see. These aren't usually very chippy, but the standard cutters can kind of plow through different densities a little bit easier, whereas sometimes the negative will kind of similarly when you hit that harder chunk, it kind of wants to back off a little bit, so you get kind of weird wavy stuff sometimes with the negatives. But if it's particularly chippy or difficult, the negative is going to handle that material better, and you're not going to get as much chipping. So it's just up to you, you know, which way you want to go. Now, one thing also, another thing I'm going to do, I'm not even going to use my round. I'm going to pull out there's a couple different things to do here. So I don't really love square blanks anymore. One thing you can do is actually use your detailer, and you're taking off a very small bite, and that can kind of help give you a little bit easier cut when you've got a square blank, to just knock those edges off. So you could pull out a detailer, or if you've got a square tool, you can angle that and hit one of the points. And you're doing like the same thing. Now the only problem is I think I'm going to pull the detailer back out, because I think that's actually easier. This I've got to angle, right? Like at a pretty weird angle. I don't love it, and it's throwing chips in my face. So I think I'd rather just pull out this little detailer. A little bit more manageable, you know. You can use the round cutter too, but sometimes when you're taking a bigger chunk off of that square edge, you know, so like especially at the beginning, like once you start getting things rounded, then it becomes a little bit easier. But what can happen is, if you're trying to shove either a round or even like a square full edge, and I would actually say that, you know, you really don't want to try and like shove like the entire square thing into the edge of a square blank. It's really trying to take off way too much material, and you're going to get it cracking and chipping out like in big chunks. So I wouldn't do that. If you're going to come in with the square, take like little nibbles off of one side. But even with the round one, you're taking off a pretty good amount of material at one time, and it's like it hurts, like almost like it's slapping the thing, scraping it, and it's just not very fun. So if you can minimize how much cut you're taking off in the beginning, you know, just getting in a little there, you know, it just really makes things a little bit easier. Seems like it'd go a lot slower, but frankly, I would almost argue you can get through it even faster. Because you can actually move the tool faster. I think that's good. We got that thing rounded enough. It's still not round, but let's come back in here now, and I got, again, my standard cutter. And that's much easier. Look at that. It's cutting nicely. Another little tip or trick you can do if you are going to try like a standard cutter, but you're a little bit worried about it being kind of chippy, is you can tilt the angle of the tool. It gets a little bit weird, and you may need to move your tool rest up a little bit, but it's not the most comfortable position. But if you can just reduce the angle slightly, rather than, and you never really want to come in like at an upward angle. Flat is what, you know, is typical. That's what they recommend, but you can kind of just come in and tilt it down, and you're going to get a less aggressive cut. So if you got a chippy material and you got a standard cutter, it's basically you're making the standard cutter a negative rate cutter. That's literally that's how the negative rate cutter even came into existence, because people were doing that anyway. And they said, well, why don't we just put a negative angle on the cutter? And then you can hold the tool without, you know, this extreme angle for certain materials. So let's stop and let's see how we're doing here. We'll get you guys on the side of here a little bit. Very exciting stuff. Can't wait to see how this turns out. Oh, I like that white. You gotta, you know, just a little bit. The way that I poured these, you get just a little bit of white here and there. A little bit of blue in there. Now, one thing is, you know, if you're doing a single pen blank, you may want to take the material out of the middle of the blank. You know, you're going to be, if you go for one side of these, if you're doing a 50-50 blank, like this, you know, poured blank, you may want to, like, you know, take the material out of the middle if you're doing like a Sierra. You're going to kind of waste a lot on the ends, but that's how I would go, probably. But for a two-piece pen, the other thing is you may want to try to offset just a little bit, because this is kind of like right in the middle. And you may end up just getting, like I'm kind of getting, is just like red and blue on each piece mostly. So you may want to try to come in from one end, and you can kind of move things around, you know. That's a good skill to have, is kind of not just, I got a pen blank, let's cut it. Let's see where this is all going to line up on my pen, you know. So it's looking good. Let's give it a turn here. But you might notice there's little pinholes and stuff, and that's not something like I got an air bubble or something. That's in the pine cone material itself. So that's why you know, for many reasons, you're going to want to use a CA finish on top of these. You're going to need to fill some little divots and things possibly, and you want to seal it. You want to protect this, because that stuff will absorb moisture, and it could expand or contract or do some weird stuff with changes in humidity. It's always good to seal materials off like that. All right, so let's see here. Hybrid lathe is in the house. The kit, sorry, I guess I didn't mention which kit exactly I'm using. I'm using the Junior Independence, because that just seems like the most fitting kit for a patriotic 4th of July pen. And that reminds me, I got to go get a link. So I got that at Turner's Warehouse, of course. So I'm taking, you know, light cuts. I'm not trying to hog off a bunch of material here. That'll kind of help, but I definitely do like this standard cutter, because what's happening is, again, the different densities, there's some hardnesses. When you get bigger chunks of the pinecone, like it's getting, I can feel that it's like harder. right here, and then it's soft, and then there's like a little hard piece here, you know, and so sometimes those negatives can kind of bounce around a little bit more, whereas I can get a pretty smooth cut with this standard cutter with these different materials. Another thing that can kind of help, I've gotten to the point where I used to, with these Easy Wood tools, I used to, you know, follow their directions, you know, explicitly, get it flat, even, and then like have the bar flat. But I find that sometimes, you know, if you got a little stickiness or a weird divot in your tool rest, this thing can kind of be a little bit chunky when you're moving it. So I like to just tip it on one edge. It's just easier to move. But the other thing that you're getting is a little bit of a shear cut. So you're, again, reducing the amount of metal that's interacting with the blade, or the blank, the material. You're kind of skewing it, and it thins out just slightly the amount of material you're taking off at once. And so you can get a little bit nicer cut that way too. But you do have to, you know, get a good, not white knuckle, but you got to have a good grip on this thing. But I find it's just easier to move on a little bit of an angle. AAW into AAW, nice. Getting dinner, huh? Tell everybody I said hi. Alright, so this ought to be pretty good. I'm gonna just take a little bit more off this side. The one thing also is, like I said, the tolerances on the standard bushings, I find a lot of times they're just a little bit smaller, so I don't usually get it like perfect. The TBC style bushings are usually a little bit more accurate. So I usually kind of get them like really nipped up at that bushing. I don't want to take too much off. But I am going to put a CA finish on, so that will also build up a little bit of diameter. All right, so that's good, I think. Here we go. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is first, you guys kind of know my thing. I like to hit, especially something like this. These pine cones are not stabilized. There's little, you know, it's a fibrous material, right? I want to hit this stuff with a penetrating CA glue, and that's the super fast thin is pretty much my favorite. Another one that seems to be pretty good is actually the Instaflex thin. This stuff is pretty good. It's very thin too, but I like this one the best. I think it's the thinnest, and it cures extremely fast. It's not it's a glue, like it's an adhesive, and it's more of the you don't want to build up a bunch of this stuff because it's not the flex style. So I don't want to use this for a finish. I just want to seal. I want this to penetrate into the material and kind of basically stabilize the material. So I want a super thin material to do that with first. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to douse this thing. I'm going to double fold a little paper towel thing, and that's just to make sure I'm not making a giant mess. I'm leaving my dust collector on because it sucks the fumes away. It also sucks any dust particles that are floating around in the air. Keep it out of my finish. But we're gonna slow the lathe down very slow. I'm going like 300 and something RPMs. I'm gonna just put my towel underneath this. Well, first thing I wanna do actually, before we even do that, I wanna actually wipe this off with some denatured alcohol. Okay. That'll just get any weird stuff off the surface. And then I'm just gonna douse this guy. And this is really just here to catch any extra. And I'm not gonna use a spray because I don't want this to cure even faster. I want it to have some time to kind of penetrate into the material. This is not a finishing step. This is like a stabilizing the material, let that glue kind of soak into the pine cone and like harden it a little bit and fill any little small, tiny little gaps. All right, and it cures very fast. It's nice, it's all fully cured now. But it's penetrated in a little bit on the surface, and we've hardened that, and now what I'm gonna do is we're gonna sand. All right, and I think I'm just looking at the surface. It's pretty good, but I think it's pretty good. Now, the other thing about this is I wouldn't recommend wet sanding this because the pine cones aren't stabilized at all. So they're gonna absorb any water. So we're actually gonna dry sand this with a little bit of, we're gonna start with some 400. And you don't want to be using like a closed grain, whatever. You want to pull out like your normal, either if you've got Abernet, go for that. If you've got just your standard aluminum oxide, go for that. You want to have really slow. And you don't want it to load up. I only put like a very tiny amount of that glue, and I'm gonna sand it off basically. Again, I wish this dust collector didn't have to be running. The point of this is not to put a layer, it's not a finish. I want this to soak into the blank, and then I'm literally like sanding it off the surface. So it's not gonna, I mean, I guess that maybe there's a possibility you could like glue the bushings and all that stuff on, but it really shouldn't cause that problem. Because I only doused it, you know, one quick round, and I'm sanding like everything off. And you might find like the sandpaper, you know, because there's different hardnesses, it's going to kind of hang up on the harder parts, right? So you may have to drop down a grit, possibly, to be a little bit more efficient. And you may find that depending on what materials we're talking about, you may find that there's like, you start sanding in valleys because the softer material is going to sand at a faster rate than the wood. So this is definitely one of those areas where if you can get, like, the smoother you can get the surface off the tool, the better off you're going to be. I don't want to make it sound like, you know, these little small pine cones are difficult or anything. These are not a big deal. It's the idea, though. Other materials, some of the hybrid blanks, you know, with those stabilized woods, they can be pretty hard, pretty tough, you know, wood. And if you got a big chunk of it next to a you know, fairly soft material resin, you'll see that, you know, this sanding. I'm going to switch to a new piece. It's starting to kind of load up a little bit, so I want a fresh edge. But you might find that you're that effect of like sanding the soft material a lot faster. Like you may have little dips and stuff. So just be a little careful. These little pine cones really are not that big of a problem though. All right, so let me look at this. I think that's probably pretty good. Just want to make sure that there's no weird, like I said, in between some of the hard spots, you may still see some tool marks or scratches. There's a little bit of one right there. I think we're pretty good now. I'm going to flip this around, do a little bit of side to side. Fairly lightly, I'm not pushing hard or anything. Because we weren't using any water or anything like that, I'm actually going to wipe off in between grits with more denatured alcohol to get rid of that any dust. That will help you kind of keep weird random scratches from appearing down the road in your sanding progress. All right, so we got 400. I'm going to go up to, let's see here. I think I'm going to go to the .600 Abranet, and then I think we're going to put a finish on. I buy these giant rolls of this stuff, and I keep it for like ever. I've had this for years. Just cut off what I need, put it back. All right, so we got some 600 here, and that'll be fine. When we put the finish on, that should cover up any sanding scratches, hopefully. You can go up to like 1,000, but I don't really love sanding dry at this point. And I'd rather just not introduce water to the pine cones. I think you could get away with it without any really serious problems, but I'd rather just not mess with it. Lilia's here. How's it going? Alright, let me look at this and see if we've still got scratches going sideways. That means I haven't done enough. I don't see that. Alright, so what I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit, just very lightly. I'm going to do this way. And if you want to make sure, you know, like I said, we're only at 600. I'm pretty sure that the sanding scratches, once we put the finish on, are going to be completely gone. But I got to be honest, I haven't done this for a little while. So if you want to kind of just make sure, then after the 600, again, hit it with the alcohol. And you can see I'm pulling junk off with this alcohol. And then come back with 1,000 grit. See if I have a piece of that somewhere. Well, I don't really. Let's see here. Actually, I might. 2,000. Got like a little sanding pad thing here. Dang, I don't have 1,000. This one, 2,500. 2,000. Jeez. I gotta have 1,000 somewhere. 500. Huh. 2,000. You gotta be kidding me. All right, well, I've got another option here, if I can find one. Where's the gray? Maybe I got one down here. Huh. Don't you hate it when you can't find the thing that you need? What do we got here? 2,500. I think I need to buy a 1,000 sandpaper thing. All right, well, I can't find what I'm looking for. But I've got this, and it's somewhere up there. We'll just give it a little bit, and that's about 1,000 or something like that. I'll just kind of take out some of those deeper 600 scratches. You don't really want to go much over 1,000 though. You want to give that CA glue something to kind of grab onto. Honestly, I think 600 is probably fine. 600 or 800 is really all you need to do. But if you want to just make sure, you can just go up to 1,000 and you'll be good to go. But now, again, I'm going to wipe it off. You don't want to leave that dust on when you put a CA finish on. See, pulling stuff off every time. Okay, so we are good to go. I'm gonna put my denatured alcohol away for a minute. I'm gonna go get me, so I have kind of a weird particular way of doing my CA finishes. I'm going to use my blue paper towels. The nice thing is the small pine cones really are, there's not a lot of material there. So like when you start getting into the larger pine cones, depending on how you lay them out, there may be a lot of pine cone in there. And that can sometimes take quite a few coats, more coats than maybe otherwise, like than this. This surface is pretty good. There's maybe I'm looking to see if there's any like divots that I need to fill. There's a couple, but I think they're very small, like pinholes. And I think they're just building up layers. I'm gonna go with this thin one first. That's just gonna apply kind of a base. Grab my scissors, I cut that little bit off that I used, and then we spray it with the Insta-Set. And then I'm going to switch, like I said, I like to put a little base coat, the very thin stuff. Put a base coat of the thin. But in this case, so I'm doing something a little bit differently here, right? I don't know if there's a significant difference, but this is the one that I like to use to kind of, like I said, stabilize, to penetrate into materials, the Starbond Superfast Thin. I've used it for years and it works great. I don't have a lot of experience with this, the Instaflex from Turner's Warehouse, the thin. It is very thin, but it is a slightly different formula. So I'd rather use this as finish because it's the flexible one. It's the one that's not going to crack. So I'm going to lay down, and this is doing a similar thing. It'll penetrate more if there's still any areas that weren't really sealed up from that other stuff, but I'm laying down a base coat with this super thin stuff that will maybe penetrate into some of the material. Do one coat of that, and then I'm going to switch over to the, where'd it go? The medium, which is still very thin. It's not, other mediums are much thicker, I find. This is actually for me, like the perfect viscosity for finishes. I would say it's more similar to the Thin Flex from Mercury. Maybe a little thicker, but I'm really enjoying this. I wanted to try it out, and I like this Instaflex stuff from Turner's Warehouse. So let's keep this going. And it doesn't smell bad. That's one of the nice things about this stuff too. I'm just going to keep it's got a little bit of viscosity to it, but just put that on. Let it kind of thin out a little bit. Give it a couple sprays. Cut off that little bit of the towel that I used and go to the next step. My whole game plan is to just try and get this on as smooth as I can. That way I don't have to sand off a bunch of ridges. And you really want to use the activator, accelerator, whatever, when you're using especially these flexible, the finish. These are meant for finishing like this. You want to use this stuff. Oftentimes you don't really need to use an accelerator with some of the standard, like the ones that are meant to be like an adhesive. They tend to work fine. You can use it. It's, either way, but you definitely want to use it with these finishes. They're meant to be done that way. And in some brands, some of the finishes, they really just don't really set up for quite a while if you don't give it the accelerator. They're like really meant to be used with an accelerator. I think this Instaflex will set up fine without accelerator, but like I said, it really still is that's how you're supposed to do it. All right, so we'll do a little bit of this, put a few more coats on here, just to kind of make sure we got everything. You want to make sure you got everything nice and sealed up when you're, literally trying to seal a material into under your finish. But it goes quick. This doesn't take a lot of time. Apply it, spray it, do it again. All right, let's do one more. I think that's probably going to be good. The more you build up, if you're doing this, if you're using the bushings, the metal bushings, the more coats you put on, the more you build it up, the harder it's going to be to get it off. So you may want to employ, your finished bushings, the plastic ones. This usually works okay for me. I had a little difficulty last week, or last time, but now it's lathe buddy time. What time is it? Lathe buddy time. All right, we get some water. And I'm going to just kind of quickly hit it with the 600 very, very lightly. And then we'll just move on to our, green, gray, and then magic juice. I'm going to put some gloves on. We will get things rolling. Get on to the next part. I can't wait. Oh, and we got a bonus fun this week. I finally got the Miles Craft pen press. We can pen press something with it. Can't wait. It's nice. I would definitely say it's better than that other one that I had. All right, so let's just do a little bit of this with the 600. Not too much. I don't want to take off a ton of material, but I do want to get it I can feel a couple little spots that might have a little bit of a ridge. So we'll just knock this down, get it nice and flat, and then we can do the polishing more. This is cutting it, you know. It's taking off material with the wet dry stuff. It's pretty aggressive, so you don't want to be too crazy with that stuff. And we'll move on to our green, where it doesn't remove as much material as fast. That's why, you know, they call it polishing paper. More just polishing that surface. Okay, I'm going to call that good. We'll do a little side-to-side action. A little bit of gray. That's feeling silky. So who all went to AAW? Anybody else in the chat that did the event? That was in Raleigh this time? Is that right? Okay, I think that's probably pretty good. Oh, that's silky. Feeling silky. A little bit of that, and we are done. Let's magic juice this puppy. Dry off my gloves. Okay. I'm going to go get another few blue towels here. All right, step one. This is my favorite one. Get this thing going a little faster. I like to turn it off. Apply. Yeah, so is anybody at AAW right now? Woo! It's looking good. Probably right in the middle of, Chris said they were going to dinner. American Association of Woodturners. It's like the big symposium that they put on. And it moves to different locations every year. So it's basically just a wood turning symposium put on by the AAW. Like I said, I think it's in Raleigh this year. Might be wrong about that. All right, step 3. Oh, the whole crew is there. I saw Turner's Warehouse posting some stuff in 3rd Gen and Late Buddy, So Amazing, all those guys. Anthony. All kinds of people. All right, let's see here. I'm just going to go all the way through here. The blue towels. I'm going to see how things go. I think we're on step. I don't know. I might have to do 4. I think I'm on step 4. I'm going to do 4 again. Yeah, I think we're on 4. Okay. Yeah, definitely on 4. Losing track of my steps, guys. Thing is looking pretty good. Now we're on step 5, and I got that already ready. Let's get that going. Let's burn through it. We're burning through it. Okay. And I won't be lazy on step 5 here. We'll pull out the microfiber to wipe off. Okay. And our favorite, step 6. Got a little thing here. Cut it in half. Okay. All right. Let's see how we did. Ooh, so soft. I love that step 6 because it really, you can even just feel the difference when I wipe off. Even in the 5 feels fine, but when you hit it with the 6, it's like even softer, like smoother, silky. Love it. All right, so let us take this off. I'm gonna get I might leave these on. Let's see what we got here. Tough part about this is these bushings are kind of tight in the blank itself also. So sometimes my tap it on the lathe thing doesn't work as well in these types of cases. So I'm going to actually leave the TBCs in there. Probably fall out, but I'm just going to kind of tap. Yeah, that worked fine. Yeah, these things are just kind of falling out, so I'll just tap it. Yep. So again, though, doing that, there's probably little shards of finish kind of hanging over the end, so I like to use my Shopsmith pen mandrel. Only thing it's been good for. And I'm just going to kind of, I'm not pressing hard or anything. I just want to get any little shards that are sticking out or any extra material that maybe just kind of hanging off the end there, taken off so that I don't press that into the kit components, because that'll crack your whole finish. And that, I'm telling you guys, that is the worst. If the finish cracks while you're putting the parts together. Okay. That thing's looking pretty good. Oh, got that. There we go. Oh, stop the shake. Look at that. I love the little, just those little things. They, like I said, they kind of look like fireworks or something to me. The pine cones are a pretty good one for 4th of July, I think. All right, so let's set this aside. I'm actually going to go and get that Miles Craft pen press. Get that thing ready. I'll set this over here. This Miles Craft pen press, it's a beast. Like, it's a tank. And I think it's the same price as that other one that I had, or pretty close at least. So if you're looking for a pen press, Miles Craft all day. All right, so let's move this back. Get that lined up there. And again, so I've got some CA finish on these bushings. So I'm just going to dunk them in I have a little jar of acetone in my rosemary jar. And so that'll just get rid of that. It'll melt it, basically, dissolve it completely in a couple minutes. And I'm going to put my TBC bushings back in their bag so I know where they are. Put them back where they go. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the second part. Get this thing rolling here. Lined up nice. Oh. All right, so again, I'm going to pull out that detailing tool so I can kind of burn through the rounding of the blank initially. Start the dust collector. Yeah, it's pretty fun if you're able to get out to the shows. I think if you had to pick one, I'd go to SWAT. That's probably your best bet. You're guaranteed. They put on a good show every year for sure, and that can be a thing. Like some of these shows, they're kind of not really managed particularly well, and it kind of shows. Like they're not as fun for just attending, but. A lot of people go to SWAT. Is a nice thing. It's always a good show, and it's kind of in the middle of the country, so you know, sometimes, like especially for me, things that are on the East Coast, I'm like, I don't know, I don't really want to do that. It's kind of nice, not too far to travel usually, depending on where you're at. I'm gonna get rid of these gloves because they don't help while I'm turning. The other thing about this, you know, I was saying at the beginning, like you're taking less cut with this smaller tip. The other thing is there's less vibrations. Like it doesn't hurt. Sometimes when you're rounding a square blank, like it just doesn't feel good on your hand. This reduces that chatter, that vibration a lot. Getting a little excited. Getting a little excited, guys. All right, that ought to be plenty to just won't be as rough. Switching back to the round guy. You guys can see, I think. No? Okay. Everything's going good. I just want to double check and make sure I've got these bushings in the right locations on the blank. Look for my mark. Okay, yeah, this one. Yeah, okay. All right. So just want to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Okay. Slot is in August. Usually the last weekend, I think, of August. All right, we're making headway here. Let's get a little bit of a preview of what we got looking like here. So we do have a good amount of white right here. That's nice. And I kind of intended that. I kind of did a little bit of a dump in the middle at the end. So we got our white, but we also have, like I said, I like having a little bit of extra white here and there. But I like this. This is quite nice. And these pine cones, there's a little bit more, you're getting a little bit more pine cone. It just depends on how they're kind of situated in the blank. This one especially, look at that. But you might see, you know, you get a little bit of kind of like little tear outs kind of things sometimes. So not bad with these small pine cones, but it's just not smooth. That's why I like to kind of fill and hit it with that thin stuff. Just kind of fill that. There's a little bit of a little pinhole there. But everything, like I said, these things work well. You don't have to stabilize them. They turn fine, and there's minimal like messing with stuff. Like with the larger pine cones, even what I would call just like a medium size, there's a lot more fussing with filling stuff and all that, and they're just a little bit more temperamental. And it just kind of, I got to the point, because I used to sell blanks that had like a pretty long bit, you know, medium sized long pine cone in it, and they're like fabulous looking, but they were a pain to make, and they're not as easy to turn. You know, there's more stuff that you got to deal with. So I just kind of said, you know, to heck with messing with these larger pine cones. These little kind of small guys really are kind of my favorite. We're getting close here. All right, I'm just gonna stop this real quick. Sneaking up on things. Yeah, we got a few little divots and stuff here. Have to do a little bit more filling on this side. We'll just have just a hair to get off the ends there. All right, I think that's probably pretty good. Now, I might need to do a couple douses with that thin on this one, because there's just more pine cone material. And there's a few little divots and things that I'd like to try to kind of fill right away. If you don't fill divots first before you sand, then you might end up getting sanding dust trapped in there. So you don't really want to deal with that. I guess I had this thing zoomed way in, sorry about that. But I'm going to try and show you guys some of these little divots that I'm dealing with. All right, so we've got, you know, a couple little guys. This was just little areas where like the pine cone material kind of chipped away, or there was just literally like a little divot in it. All right, so a little bit more to deal with on these, but this is pretty still minimum. These are like pinholes, you know. This is minimal stuff. We're not dealing with massive like tear outs or anything. But I would like to try and fill these a little bit at least, fill it up, you know, before we even start sanding. So I'm just going to turn that thing off real quick. And again, the first step that I'm going to do is we're going to hit this with alcohol. Now, alcohol dries fast, so you know you might be saying, well, you didn't put a finish on this, but you're sticking, you know, you're putting a liquid on the pine cones, and this doesn't make any sense anymore. The alcohol is going to dry quick. The other thing alcohol is going to do is it's going to take off any saps. It'll help to kind of remove any sticky, weird stuff from the pine cones. Which you can see we're pulling some stuff out. But I just want to get that surface clear. Let it dry a little bit. It's not going to really interfere much with the CA glue or anything, but it takes, like I said, just a second to dry. If you really are worried about it, you can hit it with a little bit of air to make sure that that's fully dried out. But the alcohol just isn't really going to do a whole lot to the pine cones. And then again, I'm going to go back to my thin, super fast thin from Starbond. That's my favorite, you know, whatever you want to call this. Like I would like call it a stabilizing kind of step that I'm doing. And I'm dousing. And I want to let that sit. I'm actually going to hit it probably again. This is a case where I don't want to spray it because I don't want it to immediately cure. I want it to kind of try to soak in, and it's going to cure in like 2 seconds anyway, so you don't need to spray it. Typically the way these work, like the super fast thin, so anything that's like super thin, typically they're going to set up like really fast, like seconds. When you move over to something like a thick, they usually take quite a while to actually set up. Like maybe, you know, 30 seconds or a minute or something. So usually the thinner it is, the faster it sets up in the first place. But in this case, like I said, the goal of this is to have it penetrate into the pine cone material, and that's going to stiffen up the fibers. It'll make it less chippy and stuff. You could do that while you're turning even if you wanted. That is a way to, if you're having a difficult time with, you know, any material that will absorb stuff, hit it with this while you're turning, like douse it and then, you know, take some passes, douse it again, and you just keep kind of like stabilizing it as you go. I think that's a better way to go than try to stabilize pine cones, depending on what we're talking about. You know, in many cases, a one-off batch of pine cone blanks, even if they're the larger ones, I think I'd rather just douse the heck out of it with thin than go through the hassle of trying to stabilize them, because they're not particularly fun to do. All right, so that's definitely cured. And again, this stuff is so thin, it's really not going to be significantly filling those little holes. Another thing you may want to do is actually just literally fill it with like a little bit thicker. And that's where you can get a glove and just, you're like troweling it into the holes. I'm going to hit it again, like I said, because this one's just a little bit more, there's more stuff going on. There's bigger chunks of pine cone. I'm going to just douse it again. Chances are it's not really going to absorb a whole lot because I've already done it, but it ain't going to hurt anything, that's for sure. And I'm going to let that cure on its own again. A lot of times, if you're going to do 2 coats like I just did, because the pine cones are not stabilized, they're probably holding on to some moisture. And that's actually, if you hit CA glue with water, I mean, I don't know what's in the accelerant, but it's moisture is probably one of the components. So moisture, you know, humidity or liquid, the water, it's going to cure CA glue faster than if it was dry, let's say. So the first time you apply it, it's probably going to cure extremely fast because the pine cones are going to have moisture and it's going to cure. The second one might take a little bit longer to actually cure because it's kind of sitting on top of CA glue more. But yeah, that's all perfectly all good. All right, so one thing I'm going to do, in some cases it might help before you begin doing the sanding and finish. You might want to pull out some magnifying lenses and just kind of take a look at the surface and see if there's anything that you, like a particularly large hole. You might want to just fill that now before you start sanding, especially if it goes kind of deep into the blank. Like this one, there's a pretty decent little hole here. Oh, that's still kind of sticky. This one maybe, yeah, I could probably fill that. This one, they're not huge or anything, but they're kind of deep. And I think it's probably not a bad idea to just kind of fill these things. So let's just do that. It'll help. What I find, and we are, so what I find, the problem is if you don't fill these holes before you start sanding, you run the risk of getting sanding dust trapped in it. And if you don't get it out, you know, and usually you can get it out if you just, you know, wipe it off with denatured alcohol between sanding steps, but sometimes you don't get it all and it's not particularly fun. So let's go with I'm just going to use our finish stuff. I think that'll be fine. But I'm actually, you know, I'm using my glasses to kind of get in here, fill these things, and I'm going to just apply a dot. And I'm going to use a gloved finger. It's not going to stick to these gloves. And just kind of trowel it in there. Another one up there. Okay, so I got those two, and then we're gonna hit it with the accelerator. Even if you don't get this entirely filled, like all the way, you've filled it quite a bit, and even if sanding dust gets in there, it's not going to go like into this deep hole. That's kind of more the game with this. And you don't want to put a bunch of CA glue if you got a big hole, you just want to put like a little bit, spray it a little bit, and just keep layering it up. You don't want to try and fill a really deep hole. Because it's really just not going to work too well. There we go. Good. And then all these little surface divots, I'm not particularly worried. We'll fill those up, and I'm also going to be sanding. I'm going to take some material off, so that's going to lower those. It's going to effectively make those holes smaller, or shallower anyway. So I'm not particularly worried about some of these things. This one I'm a little bit. Sometimes you can't really tell, like some of these holes may actually go like all the way to the tube. And like I said, if sometimes things become harder to deal with after you've sanded. I think there's a couple right here, maybe. Yeah, there's a couple right there that I want to deal with. I'm trying to kind of blow off some of this accelerator because sometimes it can instant set this stuff. Some cases you might want that, others you might not. Okay, I think that's probably good. Like I said, it's just a little bit of prep goes a long way on this, just to make sure that you're not getting a bunch of junk in places that you don't want it. All right. Let's do some sanding, guys. Who's ready for some sanding? Yeah, large pine cones yeah, it's weird. They it's weird. tend to curve. That was actually that was what caused me to like just say I'm done with these stupid things. The blanks would like warp after they were fully cured sometimes. And that is probably like indicative of a moisture issue, because like I was saying, you can stabilize pine cones, but you're not 100% stabilizing them. I don't care what you do. Unless you did some sort of like industrial process where you're using like thousands of pounds of pressure on top of vacuum and all these, some crazy thing. Just using like cactus juice, you can't get the thing 100% like stabilized. So I think moisture is an issue. They still kind of grab onto moisture, or I don't know what it is, but they just became a pain. Like these little mini guys, they're so much easier to if you're making blanks or if you're turning. But they do look different. I mean, like there's something to be said about the medium, longer ones. They look cool, but man, they can be a total pain. Okay, so let's sand. Let's do some sanding. I think I'm gonna try hitting it starting with 220 maybe, and do it kind of lightly, if I can find it. 120, 240 is what it is actually, whatever. And I'm just gonna do kind of a light one because I've added a bunch of material, that CA glue, in just kind of blobs in some cases. So I'm gonna just do a little bit of, quicker work, hopefully. Still got a little bit of that accelerator on there. So dropping down one grit is going to make the sanding kind of go a little bit faster. I don't want to do a whole lot though. I'm doing it lightly. That'll get the surface flat quicker than if I tried doing this with the 400. Another reason I'm dropping down is there's a lot more pine cone material, which means harder stuff here, throughout this side of the blank. And I think that this is the time when you say, okay, I'm just going to drop down. It'll make my life easier. Got to do a little bit more work, one more step, but it's going to take me less time actually. And I think the other thing is dropping down. I know that I can really let the sandpaper do the work. Sometimes, you're sitting here sanding something and you may be on a little bit too high a grit, and then you start pressing a little harder, So dropping down has its merits. All right, I'm going to stop this. It looks like I've pretty well got this. Got a couple little shiny spots. Those are the divots, and that's not that big of a deal. I'm going to do more steps in sanding. What I'm looking for is any tool marks, but I don't feel any. Everything's nice and smooth. I got a little bit of a divot on this end. I'm going to just kind of work on a little bit, but that's good. And again, like always, very lightly with this 220. Side to side. I don't want to put a lot of deep scratches in this. And then we'll get on to our 400. Before I do that, of course, in between, if I'm dry sanding, in between every single step, I am hitting it. I'm going to clean off the surface with denatured alcohol every single time. Trust me, guys, it's a difference maker. If you're wet sanding, you really don't have to do any of this stuff, It's already doing that. And the denatured alcohol shouldn't really like destabilize your, it's not going to dissolve your CA glue. Maybe if it was sitting there, like if you dunked it in a bucket of, it may kind of have an effect on it. But just wiping it off like that, it's not going to affect the CA glue. Acetone would. It would straight dissolve it. So you don't want to use acetone to clean off your blank if you're doing CA stuff. And I really wouldn't recommend wiping it off with denatured alcohol once you've applied your finish. It could have an effect on it. Just use, and you can just use water, you know. But until we get that finish on, the pine cones are bare. They're not stabilized or anything, and so you don't want to just douse them with a bunch of water. You probably could. It's probably not going to like ruin the blank or anything, but I would recommend against it. Just looking to see if I missed any major scratches. One right there a little bit. Okay. So we did our 400 denatured alcohol. On this side, I'm just going to go up 600. We're going to look at and see if there's really any noticeable difference between going up to like that about 1,000 and just leaving it at 600. I don't think you're going to really see any difference because if you think about it, my reasoning behind this is not only have I have tested it, I've looked at this, but in just normal woodworking, granted that's wood and you know it's a little bit different than a solid surface, but you know you only sand up to like 300 and then put a finish on, maybe 400. You're not going to like, you know, thousands of anything. So, and it fills in the scratches. You can't see that. So in most cases 600, 800, you're good. That's good enough, and the finish will cover up any. It basically fills in those scratch patterns, and you don't see them. We'll give it a little bit of a test though, just to make sure. One thing you can do also, if you're like just going with 600, you can kind of lighten up your how hard you're pressing, which will, even though you're not really changing the grit, you're just not pressing as hard, and it'll kind of lessen the scratches a little bit more. So it's effectively like kind of using a lighter or a smaller grit, but. And then again, big step, alcohol. Just keeps all the junk out. All right, so we're done with all that. I'm gonna turn this thing off. We can do it without the thing. Let's see here. I'm gonna look and see what's going on here. In my disappearing castings. Yeah, I'll definitely have to tune in this year and see what you guys are up to at SWAT. That's funny. I think the divots add character. Yeah. The only problem is though, if you are going to put a CA finish on, those things are going to just stick out like a sore thumb. you know. And if you leave them, yeah, you know, that's the thing is I recommend, you know, one thing you could do. So, you know, I just said that, you know, I douse it. You know, we just went through this whole process of me, you know, explaining that I'm going to douse it with that thin CA. That is stabilizing it a little bit, but it's not really stabilizing it. That's the only thing. So you could kind of get away with that and then sand it off. And it's going to be a lot better. And I think for the most part, these mini or small, you know, but just not a pine cone that's got like a significant amount of like the wood, the center core of the pine cone, like the bigger ones. I think these little ones, I don't think you're going to run into a lot of problems with moisture, contraction, and, you know, all that expansion. I don't think that's really going to be that big of a deal, but you know, you don't really want to find out later that it kind of blows your, because what will happen is if they pick up a significant amount of moisture and expand, it'll crack your pen, like the whole thing. So that's what we're trying to do is seal it off. And I mean, it's not a perfect recipe, even if you put a CA finish on top. But that's another reason why I also like to douse first and let these things absorb some of that CA glue, because that will help kind of lock in and prevent moisture from being absorbed into the material in the first place. But then if you cover it, you should be pretty good. And, you know, it's not 100%, like it still could pick up stuff. Another thing that I could, you know, I don't usually do this, but another thing you could do with your blanks to help really seal things off. I kind of forget about this usually. I'm going to go grab the other one. So one thing that I'm not doing, which I could, is you can actually seal the ends as well. And that will help even more prevent moisture from being absorbed into the pine cone material. And there's something to be said about it. And really all you got to do is just kind of put a couple layers quick. It doesn't need to look good or anything, but you're just putting a couple little quick, you know, you can literally just put it on your glove and just kind of wipe it. And you can help seal the ends even, which would be not a bad idea, especially if this pen may be going, you know, like I'm in Nevada. If I was sending a pen to Hawaii, you know, one of these, that's a case where I really might think about sealing the ends as well. Typically, like I said, with these little pine cones and all the things that are going on with this specific blank, probably not that big of a deal. I'm not doing it, you know. But if you want to take it to the nth degree and try to prevent any issues, that is another thing that you can do to help prevent these, you know, any problems from occurring. But like I said, I think for the most part, I think it's not going to really be a problem with these little pine cones in the first place. They just don't have enough material to really absorb a significant amount of moisture and then expand significantly on top of all that. But the bigger ones, that can be a problem. So that is, you know, that's a reason to stabilize them. That will definitely minimize that a little bit, but you still want to cover them up. All right, so again, we're going to lay down a base. We're going to put on our 600. Yeah, we're good. We're putting the finish on. I'm going to put on this thin guy first, just as a base layer for our finish. And that, again, is going to kind of absorb if there's any places that it can absorb. But it's just going to give me a foundation for my finish. Is it necessary? I don't know. I have no reason to argue that you need to do this in any way, but it just seems to make sense to me. So we go with the Instaflex thin first. That's what I'm doing. And I would prefer to use the Instaflex thin over the one that I use, the super fast thin. I don't really, this'll work, this is fine. You're putting down a really thin layer. You shouldn't really have to worry about it cracking or anything. However, I've got this other one, and this one is meant for finishing. It's flexible. So I'd rather lay this one down. It's about the same thing. That's why I'm choosing one over the other. And then we're going to go to the medium version of the Instaflex. This stuff's really good. I really like this stuff. And we'll put on a few coats. I don't feel like I really got a very good coating on that one, but that's okay. Whew, I'm hungry. I gotta finish this pen up so I can go eat. Okay, and then I forgot to spray it, I think. Give it a spray. Let me look at this thing. Yeah, I'm getting some ridges. I don't like that so much. A little bit ridgy. I hope I dropped my paper. Got some weird stuff going on. Chunks. I don't like that. I'm actually going to come in here and sand this a little bit because I got a weird like drip or something. Where's my... That is going to... If I don't fix this now, it's going to screw up the rest of the finish. Okay. And then I'm just going to wipe this thing off with a little bit of water this time. It's probably not fully sealed yet, but that's not that big of a deal. Just want to get any of the sanding dust off before I start adding more. And I'm going to blow it off right away. I think something that's happening is I'm spraying this way too close to the blank. I need to be like a good 6 to 8 inches away when I'm spraying this. It's a little bit more liquid than the mercury version, and I didn't really have that. I think it was like dripping down, and then I'm adding another layer, and it wasn't dried off. So another thing I could do is wipe off the blank after applying and spraying. But I think I got a little bit of that on the last one even, but it wasn't that bad. Didn't really notice it. This time though, it was like, ugh, there's a huge ridge. So something to be aware of. Okay, so let's go back and start doing this again here. Sometimes I get a little aggressive with my spray. That was much better. Yeah, it's good to stabilize just about everything if you're in a really humid environment. But I mean, like I said, it really kind of goes both ways because I'm in a very dry climate. But if I ever send something or take something to a very humid, you know, it's really, it's not that big of a deal that it is humid. You know, if it's always humid, right? It's really the difference where when it fluctuates, that's where the problems run into. But yeah, with like normal woods and things like that, definitely. But I think with these, like, I wouldn't. You're gonna have a tough time stabilizing these little pine cones. Just is not gonna be worth it, probably. And again, you're not really getting a huge advantage. You know, I don't think. It's not solving the problem necessarily. All right, so that's looking better. A lot of times you can tell if you've put a ridge in when you're applying, maybe not right when you're doing it, but you go to put on the next coat and you got this giant bump in the middle of your blank and you're like, ugh. And so you can just kind of do what I did, try and sand it kind of down a little bit and then fill in. If it's really massive, you may need to kind of like sand the whole thing back. It might be better to do that than just try and keep coating it. Okay. I like to use the back of my glove to just kind of, if it kind of sticks to it, then I'm like, oh, that's not dry. That's looking good. I think put on a couple more coats real quick here. I got a few more things, so let's just do like 2 more. Just for good measure, you know. Thin coat, yeah, UV resin, anything that's going to seal it. Then you don't need to use CA if you don't want to. I haven't really been able to get UV resin to work as easily as CA glue. I'm not saying it can't. I'm just saying I have an easier time putting CA finishes on than trying to get the UV finish to work the same. It also takes longer to cure and do that stuff. I can kind of get through the CA finish quicker usually. So either way, but UV finishes are great. They work well for sealing and doing all that stuff. Harder to repair. If you need to repair it, that's going to be kind of a problem. But probably, you know, really more durable too in the long run, because they are not susceptible to acetone. That's always the problem, right? If you put a bulletproof finish on, if anything happens to the finish, like, you gotta strip it pretty much. Other things you can kind of fix easier, but they may not last as long. So it's kind of a give and take. That was always the conundrum in woodworking. Like, should I put I got my workbench. What finish should I put on there? Should I put a, really durable spar varnish? Or, no, just put some oil on it because you're going to have to repair it like daily. CA finishes are extremely durable though. Still, it's still a pretty good option, but I think I'm just going to need a new piece of paper here. But your UV finish is going to be a little bit more durable. All right, so I got a new piece here. Like I said, just kind of going easy with this 600 because it tends to want to take off material. This wet dry stuff is fairly aggressive. But it will get through it, flatten everything very fast. And you don't have to even like sit here for like the whole time with this 600 until it's like perfectly smooth. You can just knock down the hardest parts and then you can move on to this. This is still going to remove material and flatten stuff. The green paper. And if you want, if you could get on that finish really well, like you don't really have a lot of ridges at all, you could just go to this green and start there. You might even just try it out, see how it works. But it will kind of roll over divots and things, or not divots, but like bumps and ridges. Because it's thinner or more flexible paper, it'll kind of follow contours a little bit, and so it'll tend to not want to flatten things out fully. That's why I like the wet dry. That paper makes it a little bit stiffer. You can flatten things a little bit quicker, better. All right, so that's probably pretty good. A little bit of side-to-side action. Move on to the gray. Should be good. Okay, magic juice. Now, one thing that I didn't do last time, and sometimes I do this, is I actually crack the blank off of those, because I've kind of glued the bushings on at this point. A lot of times I'll actually do that now, or even sometimes before I even start doing sanding or whatever. But I think I'm gonna wait. I think it's fine, but that is one thing that sometimes you could do that, and if you did run into a problem, you haven't done all the magic juice steps. if you have to redo the finish, for some reason it cracks off or something. I've really never had that happen where it like totally ruined the, I can leave that, the finish. Oh yeah, that's looking pretty good. Got a couple low spots, but I think they'll go away once we polish it. If I was really, really concerned, I would probably do a little bit of extra sanding, polishing, but I think it's fine. So let's do step 1. Magic juice. Speed right. There we go. Okay. All right, I won't be lazy this time. I'll use the microfiber in between. Step 2. We're almost there, guys. And I'm excited to use that Miles Craft pen press. I haven't used it yet, I don't think. Okay. Step 3. Oh. Helps to close the bottle before you start shaking it up. Thanks, Vinny. Yeah, I hope these things turn out good. And I don't know if you were here when we were talking about it. I'm putting it on one of those junior Independence kits. So I'm hoping that and now it's like the copper looking one, so it kind of looks like a flagpole kind of thing. I'm hoping it all kind of comes together. Looks pretty good. And of course, everybody that's in the Pen Blank Club is getting one. I'm gonna go get a new paper towel. Yeah, so this month is a fun box, I think. These 4th of July Pinecone blanks, plus the metal flake. That's pretty cool. Had a lot of fun making both of these. We got a question. Let me wipe this guy off. I'll check it out. Let's see here. Yeah, that shakes the bottle without the thing on. Yeah, I know. I do that all the time. I really got to watch out. I don't mind the magic juice. Where it really is really bad is when I forget on the pigments, the liquid pigments. Oh, man. Was this the first pour? This is the first one. Yeah. Like I said, what happened with the first one is that I didn't even actually think about, even when we were kind of talking about it and when I did it. The white was heavier, so it kind of sunk to the bottom of the blank, which isn't what I wanted, but I don't think is really going to make the blanks look bad or anything. It's going to be different a little bit, though. It'll be a little bit more like red and blue, and then like white will be more prevalent on like one side, kind of, I think. So I don't know. I mean, you know, that may not be the best, but I don't think they're bad. But I turned this one. I would have turned one of those just as equally. But this was what I was. This was my like the game plan, you know. So I really wanted to see how these turned out more. But yeah, there's, you know, it just depends on how you want to do things. You can use the split cup, but I kind of like this a little better, you know, just personally, because I can kind of put the white where I want in amounts that I want more, you know. So I kind of like this method better. That's why I did it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that other pour. I did pour the rest. I prefer this method better. So when I did the extra ones, the extra batches after, I made them this way again, rather than a split cup. But I don't personally feel like the split cup blanks are inferior in any way. They're just not what I was really going for. Exactly, you know. So we're on step 6. I'll get one of these little, I like using the little microfiber style. 6. All right, here we go. Oh, stop. I'll just wipe this off. Oh, silky smooth. I love the number 6. It just makes the surface feel so smooth. Slippery. It's like slippery, but not in your hands. That's what I love about it. It's great. Okay, so we'll get these little rags out of the way, and then again, I got to kind of tap off the. I'm going to just scoot this back a little bit, get this in view. I got to crack the bushings off. That sounds really bad, but it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes they're not stuck, but this time they are. So all I do, give it a little tap, 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 and they pop right out usually. But again, and I'm always careful with that edge. I don't want to even put my fingers on it because there's little pieces, very tiny, but oh, and that one came right out. So as long as you don't load it up way too much, you can get away with using the metal ones, but you do run the risk of really kind of severely gluing your blank to the metal if you're not kind of careful. So I didn't put that many coats on, you know. If you tend to put lots of coats on, then you might want to just switch out and use the finished bushings so that you don't have that problem. But I mean, even if you layer on a ton, even if you're using plastic, it's still going to kind of stick to those things. So that's why I try to thread the needle. Sometimes though, if you don't put enough coats on, you could sand through if you got a bunch of ridges to sand out, you know. So it's like I try to be like just in the middle. It's not too much, not too little. Sometimes I fail though. And if I haven't put enough on, you'll know. There's a sand through spot that's kind of dull. And but all I got to do is just put some more finish on. It's not a big deal. All right, so, and I do that little sanding to get rid of that excess material before I put it in. And then these bushings, because they're CA finish, you know, there's CA glue on them. The previous ones were in here. They've been soaking for a while. Let me go grab some tweezers or whatever these things are. Tweezers? Sounds like tweezers. So I just get them out of there. They don't even need to sit in there as long as, you know, to turn the second half, but these have sat in there long enough. It's going to dissolve any CA glue, and then I just wipe them off. Put them back in the bushing storage. And then the ones that I just did, where'd they go? They go in. Let it soak. I mean, 5 minutes is usually plenty. It depends on how much you got on there, but it doesn't really take that long to dissolve that stuff if it's soaking in it. Wipe it off and they're ready to go again with no CA finish on them. Okay, put this away. And before I lose or misplace these, those are going in there. There, okay. In fact, I'm gonna put this jar of acetone out so that I remember to put those things away. Okay, so let's where'd the blank go? Lost the blank. There it is. Found the blank. So I'll give you guys a side view over here real quick. Stop the shake. Ooh. That one's looking mighty fine. I like that one. We got a little bit more of the pine cone in there this time. It's looking pretty shiny to me. All right, let's assemble these guys. And I'm going to look. Let's head over to, let's see here. I got to turn my camera back on, switch to 1. All right, so here's the new, finally got the Milescraft pen press, and I've already put a little piece of felt on this little ramrod thing here. So that's done. So that's exciting. All right, now I got my marks, the way these blanks line up on the inside of the blank. So we're just going to arrange them. Let's see, did I lose my, there's that mark on the inside. Kind of lost it. One problem with dousing things with acetone, or alcohol even, is you might lose your thing. I don't think it really matters in this case. Okay, so we got a little bit of red there. It could go literally anywhere. This is not going to make any difference, I don't think. And I don't think, and it could go, let's see. I would say it probably actually goes like this. I think my mark's right here. I think it goes like this. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That lines up, that's fine. We'll do it like this. I ended up actually, I kind of screwed up when I glued the tube in. I had a little bit, this blank was a little bit long, and I ended up, I kind of messed up. I glued the tube a little bit further on the wrong side. So I ended up sanding off a decent bit of material on the side that matches up. So not only did I lose the kerf, but then I pretty much took 2 kerfs off. So like no matter what I do, this isn't really gonna line up and like work as well. So I think I'm just gonna throw out how it was supposed to be. And I think I saw, oh yeah. Okay, so I've identified, I got a little flaw here. There's like a pinhole that I didn't fill. We're putting the clip over that. And I'm gonna go with this. We're gonna do it like that. Okay, so Jake's here. What's up, man? I always forget where I set things. Oh, it's terrible. Let's see, did I miss anything else? First part, okay. Pen tape measure. Yeah, I know, I do too. I got pencils everywhere in the shop, and if I don't do that, it's generally terrible. All right, so we're gonna put these 2 parts together first. Make sure this thing's, so this is the We the People, or the Junior Independence, but it's got We the People around the center band. That's pretty cool. It's got on the finial, so the part that is kind of on the top of the cap, holds the clip in, let's say. It's got 1776 up there. Let's see, there we go. 1776. So with this kit, you kind of you don't want this thing being all cockeyed. I would probably arrange the 1776 like in this way, to where you're reading it from the front of the pen. That seems to make the most sense to me. All right, so I got to remember to do that when we put that part in, and then nothing spectacular on the bottom part here. But it is like this kind of, what do you call it? The antique copper, which is a kind of a cool plating. We don't see that, you know, a whole lot. Yeah, see. So hopefully it'll go good with this blank. I don't know. I think they got a couple. I think there's 3 different Junior Independence platings that you could get. All right, so again, I'm going to make sure this thing's locked down all the way in there. I'm going to kind of get this thing started, and I want it to be like this. And I'm just going to give it a little bit. How does this work even? I haven't used this one, so I'm not totally used to how all this stuff works. Whew. You're doing something really long, though. Oh, man, does it fit? Jeez, I don't even think I can get this to fit. That is the one problem with this thing. Let's see if I can get this apart without... Okay. All right, we're okay. Yeah, that's a little... Do I need this spring thing? Because that's pretty tight. Whew. That really holds it in place. Okay. And then we set these things so it gives it a backdrop. I don't know if you need this whole spring thing. Seems like it might be a little bit much. There we go. What is happening here? It's creaking and doing all kinds of stuff, but it worked. Okay, so we got that guy in. This one's gonna probably take kind of two shots, add a little thing. Now, actually, shoot. I don't really want, so you could, it would probably make sense to line up the We the People in a certain way. I didn't really think about that, but I didn't do that. Maybe a little bit of oil on this thing might kind of help. I don't know why it's making so much noise. Okay, so we got 2 parts done. And then I want to cover, okay, so I want to cover, I got a little bit of a pinhole. Frankly, I don't want to mess with it. So we're going to put the clip over that. And it's going to look like right here. So I want my 1776 to be lined up. Come on, line up. Okay. I got a little flaw right there, so there we go. That's good. I got that set up. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of this screw thing. I don't know that we need this spring. Well, I guess the spring holds the tension. Okay. I think the spring will get a little easier as time goes on. Make sure 17, that's all good. Okay. Flip a thing down. I'm going to add a little bit of 3-in-1 oil to that rod because I think it just needs a little bit of, I think it needs a little bit of love, you know. There we go. Maybe. I don't know what's making the noise. Maybe it's. I don't know. It's making some noise, but it's working pretty well, so no complaints. Okay, and the final step. This little guy. Let's get this thing going. That's not far enough. I think I'm going to try, just make sure I got everything nice and tight. There we go. Flip this out of the way so I can get it off. I will say this spring is really tight to get this thing open, but it works really well. Okay, so I don't even know how I had that arranged. Actually, we'll try all the different positions first real quick here and see. I don't think that was it. I think that was it. Yeah, I think that was it. Oh, that looks pretty good. I mean, if that isn't a patriotic pen, I don't know what is. Again, you got that 1776. I don't know which way it needs to be up. I can't see. Focusing. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe like that. And then We the People around the center band. Yeah, not too bad. I really like this. This thing's, and again, to me, like these things kind of remind me of fireworks. Really good kit though. Let me go grab the link because they got them at Turner's Warehouse. Grab the link to the Junior Independence kits. It's a really good one. you know, the whole junior line I like, because it's all the same drilling and all that, you know, you got the same stuff, but between the platings and the little things that they do, that, you know, it has that we the people and all that. So it's very simple. You know, the kit is all kind of the same thing, but they're different. You know, I love it. So, and they've got antique silver, antique brass, chrome, gunmetal, and antique copper. The one that we did here is the antique copper. Really like that, especially with the red, white, and blue. That's a pretty nice color. Antique brass would be really good as well with these colors. I think in the past I did the antique brass already, and I really like that one. Antique, you know, any of them. I think I would go for one of the antique colors over just chrome, probably. Personally. So I'm grabbing you guys a link real quick here. All right, so here's the link to the Junior Independence kits. What do you guys think of this thing? Not too bad. I mean, that is... And for once, I got the Pen Blank Club blanks, these 4th of July. Oh, I forgot to put the ink in. Whoopsie. And actually, one other thing. So we're not done yet, guys. I'm trying to get to lunch, but I'd rather finish this up properly real quick here. So let's switch over. Get this thing. So one of the other nice things about this Miles Craft is it's actually got a little storage space for some stuff. It's got a nice base, like little rubber things, so it doesn't slide around. That was one of the problems I had with that other one. It's got mounting holes, so you could actually do everything vertically if you wanted. You could like literally mount this thing on the wall, and that would be pretty awesome. I mean, I prefer doing vertical. Anyway, my problem is I don't have to set up another camera just to do these things. So the reason I do them horizontally is actually just because of the streaming. If I wasn't videoing this stuff, I would totally just have it on the wall. So we're putting a little bit of wax on these threads. That will eliminate the squeaky squeak. We don't like the squeaky squeak. Maybe you like the squeaky squeak. I don't know. I don't like it. I think it makes it sound like a cheap pen. We'll get that done. You don't need to do the cap threads because it's plastic on metal, so it's never going to squeak. It shouldn't squeak. If it does squeak, you got a problem that I don't know how to fix. Put our ink in. That's a good idea. There we go. Now it's an actual pen. Yeah, I like it. That's a nice pen. So anyway, the Pen Blank Club boxes, they'll be going out on the 15th or so. Depends on how things line up with days and all that stuff with shipping, but somewhere around the 15th, Pen Blank Club, and it'll be these guys, the Pinecones with the red, white, and blue, and the metal flake, those are pretty cool too. So this is a pretty good box, I think. Let's see here. Is there any questions or anything? Why not cut the square edge off of the bandsaw? You could do that. Definitely, if you want to do that. I don't have my bandsaw set up, and you'd have to arrange it in a certain way and do a bunch of stuff. So it's easier just to chuck it up on the lathe. But for me, but that's definitely something you can do. You could even use a grinder if you wanted to kind of get things somewhat round. So let's see here. Yeah, I'm happy with the Pinecone. So going back to the Pinecone blanks, technically you could probably fill more. I lost my square. If you got like just a big square mold, you can kind of fill it a little bit more, and then you're going to be cutting in the middle. So you could get a little bit more variation of the pine cones, or more density of them compared, compared to the, the single slots. They're going to have to kind of arrange in some way. And so you could maybe get slightly, I don't know if I really want to call them better looking blanks, but you may get a little bit more pine cone going on if you did just a full brick and then cut them. So I just do want to mention that, but it really all just depends on the size of the pine cones and how they lay. And that's really going to be the case even if you poured them all in a brick and cut them and did that stuff. But you may have more chance of getting like a little bit more of a densely packed thing going on. But it'll kind of vary, the way that these things kind of sit and what type of pine cones, all that kind of stuff. But they typically, like I said, if they're kind of that smaller pine cone, you're going to get similar results to this, basically. They look good, and they're not, like I said, compared to the bigger, if you get like those long pine cones and it's kind of a big thing, you maybe cut it in half or something like that. Those can warp the blanks, and they can just be a little bit more of a pain to deal with the turning. They're cool in their own way. They're different. I don't know that they're cooler, but they are a different thing. But they can be a little bit of a pain to make and to turn. Whereas these little guys, there's really not much going on. I mean, fill a couple little pinholes really, and that's about it. So anyway, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this. And I hope that everybody that's in the Pen Blank Club is looking forward to the boxes this month. Like I said, 15th, they'll be going out. And for anybody that is at AAW, hopefully you're having a wonderful time. I can't wait to hear about that. So anyway, guys, I hope you have a great rest of the night. Thanks for joining the fun, and I'll see you